Nigeria's Inspector General of Police, Muhammad Adamu, has again poured cold water on current efforts by state governments in various parts of the country to establish regional security outfits as a way of checking the rising spate of insecurity in the land. In a statement from the force headquarters over the weekend, Mr. Adamu said that the deliberate arming of vigilantes and quasi-state and regional security outfits is in contention of the provision of Firearms Act and a threat to national security. The police boss therefore ordered a nationwide clampdown on prohibited arms, particularly against the background of impending governorship elections in Edo State and Ondo State. The Inspector General has therefore ordered the commissioners of police in 36 states of the Federation to identify, disarm, arrest, and prosecute illegal arm owners. The state police commissioners were also directed to immediately convene an enlightenment meeting of 4 vigilante groups and quasi-security outfits spread across the country in order to ensure that their activities are in conformity with the extant laws guiding their establishments and operations. Adeswa, what's your take on this?
Well, I mean, everybody knows it's no longer news that we have a problem of proliferation of light weapons and small arms in the country. In 2018, you recall that the IG also embarked on a mop-up, this time around granting some sort of amnesty for people to lay down their weapons, giving them a duration to do so. If not, it will visit the law on them. That happened, although we did not hear how successful that was, how many arms they were able to mop up from the country. And then 2 years after we're hearing this, but particularly for these vigilante groups. Now, the argument has been, although this statement, perhaps we need to look at it again, because it says prohibited firearms. So maybe the idea doesn't mean to disarm totally these vigilantes. That's one correction I don't get. That's it. So how do you disarm those who are supposed to guard communities, property and lives? And then you have those marauding with weapons that they are supposed to fight against. It doesn't make any sense. So there has to be more to, disarming, arresting and prosecuting. Can we look at, the proliferation, the entry points, the illegal importation of these arms into the country? Can we look at the borders? And we have seen that even in recent times, it goes beyond the borders. We have seen large cache of arms coming into the country with no owner identified. It wasn't 1, it wasn't 2, it wasn't 3 times from the different ports, Tinkan, Apapa port. We had those large cache of arms coming in, and the owners were not identified. Up to now, we don't know what the investigation has revealed. So can we start from that point to even stop them from coming into the country first and then mop them up? Because these arms are not even cheap. So how are they even getting in?
If you ask me, who would I ask?
The Firearms Act allows you to have firearms just for the purpose of hunting, then guns for game, for sport. The Firearms Act in Nigeria does not allow private individuals to hold automatic weapons or semi-automatic weapons. And consistently, the Nigeria police has tried to enforce the Firearms Act. But the reality, of course, that we have seen is that in the light of the conflict situation in Nigeria, that is nationwide, that is widespread, people bring in arms illegally. And what is responsible for that, in part, is the porousness of our borders, our inability as a country to manage our borders, and the ineffectiveness of the entry points into Nigeria, either at the ports or elsewhere. We hear occasionally that the Ports Authority or the Nigeria Immigration Service, that they are able to, or the Customs Service, that they are able to, arrest people bringing arms into the country. But oftentimes we don't know the end of the story. It may be repeated, it may be put on the pages of newspapers, but the truth of the matter is that our borders are very porous. So, and this has security implications. So when the government wakes up on the eve of 2 major elections in Edo and Ondo states, and they begin to complain about the need to mop up illegal weapons, then of course you become curious. The question you ask is that, is this a way of just making the right noise at the appropriate time? Whereas this is a perennial problem that has been there, and the Nigerian state has proved incapable of checking the proliferation of light arms and small weapons from the various porous borders. So I think this noise that is coming up now is just self-serving. I don't think it's an attempt to make any serious effort. If there's going to be an election in Edo State in September and gubernatorial election in Ondo State in October, and you have this crisis that you have across the Northeast, the Northwest, you know, so somebody just making a statement, it doesn't show any seriousness. Nigeria needs to put in place, you know, a much more forward-looking, result-oriented, serious-minded strategy for checking the proliferation of light weapons and small arms across the country. As at the moment, we are a signatory and a participant in the regional protocol for checking the proliferation of small arms and light weapons across the West African region. But I do not see how we take it seriously. Because if you look at the northern flank of the country, the whole of that stretch of border from Chad to Niger to the other side is completely open. And yet we complain about ISWAP, the Islamic service in the West African province. And yet, at the same time, we're not taking the right steps. But of course, it's good to make this noise by the Inspector General of Police, but we will throw back the question to the Inspector General of Police. What is he doing as the Inspector General of Police of Nigeria? And what is the level of cooperation, coordination, collaboration among the various security agencies, which is part of the problem? We talk about it all the time that they should collaborate, but it's not something that can happen on an episodic basis. We need to have a concerted effort on the part of our security agencies to protect Nigeria. We don't have that. Instead, what we have is interdepartmental and intradepartmental rivalry. And that in itself is part of the problem. Customs does not know what immigration is doing. Immigration does not know what the police is doing. The intelligence agencies do not even know what these units are doing. And yet we have this problem. So it's not enough for the Inspector General of Police to just issue a press statement. I'm not impressed by that.
Action, 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 all right? That's what Dr. Abbott is calling for this morning. That's all on news headlines. We'll take a short break now. Then later we'll have the trio of Rotus, Michael, and Aaron to give us updates on Africa and global business and COVID-19. Stay with us. All right, welcome back to the morning show right here on the Rise News. Our dependable Rotus Odiri is here to give us Africa business update. Over to you, Rotus.
Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Doctor, and good morning, Adesoa.
Good morning.
So, as we talked about on Friday, unemployment numbers for Nigeria are out. The Bureau of Statistics released the second quarter of 2020, that's this year. Unfortunately, we did not get any information through the last 6 quarters. But here's the summary here. 27.1% for Q2 2020, up 4 percentage points from 23.1 in the last time we got this figure. Underemployment is at 28.6%. Combined, Nigeria's unemployment plus underemployment is at 55.7%. compared to 43.2 in the third quarter of 2018. Youth unemployment, big jump there, to 34.9% in Q2 2020 versus 29.7%. If you add underemployment, we are looking at a 63.1% unemployment plus underemployment for our youth. We take a look at the states. There were some highlights with regards to states' unemployment. The highest unemployment was found in Imo State, 48.7%. Akwa Ibom followed at 45.2%. Rivers State at 43.7%. Highest underemployment was in Zamfara at 43.7%. Lowest underemployment was Anambra at 17%. Now, the Bureau of Statistics released a statement in their report stating that, and the part that's highlighted there, they had to resort to what's called a CATI, Computer Assisted computer-assisted telephone interviews because COVID-19 had disrupted their field work. The computer-assisted telephone interviews use smaller sample sizes. They say that the sample sizes are usually between 1,900 to 2,200 households. So it's something to keep in mind when we think about, the figures that are being reported here. Because if you have a smaller sample size, then you have to ask yourself that if there was more robust field work being done, would the numbers actually be higher? Speaking of which, Chris Ngige, as we look at the number of unemployed youths across the country, Chris Ngige, the Minister of Labour and Employment, Dr. Ngige rather, he was on a 2-day workshop in May of 2019. The title of the workshop was Breaking the Resilience of High Unemployment Rates in the Country. At that time, in May 2019, he said that we are looking at an unemployment rate of 33%. That is what he projected at the time. Economists that were surveyed also said that they were looking at upwards of 30%. South Africa, that has our labor force population is greater than the entire population of South Africa. They are at 30%. If you don't include people who are no longer looking for work, they go to 39%. So it's kind of worrisome that Nigeria would have a lower rate than them. Also, the total workforce population grew from 115 million in Q3 2018 to 116 million, a growth of just 1.2% as reported by the MBS, when population growth has been growing at 2.7, almost 3%. So, the thing is, with the quarters that we're missing, we didn't get the fourth quarter of 2018, we didn't get all of 2019, we didn't get the first quarter of 2020. It's a little troubling that after all this time passed, all they were able to give us was the quarter that was mostly affected by COVID-19. So, those figures, I don't know, with what we're looking at, we'll accept them as they are, but we're hoping that the gaps are filled in from the Bureau of Statistics. Moving on to Lagos State. On Friday, we talked about the Lagos State ride-hailing fees. We looked at this on Friday. We talked about how these on ride-hailing operators, as well as taxi cab operators, they're going to be paying upwards of 10 million or 25 million or 5 million to 1.5 million to pay for license fees and also to renew them. There was an update on, later that day after we actually put this report. I don't know, maybe they were watching, but they had a meeting with stakeholders in the ride-hailing space. We have a tweet here from Gawat Jubril. He is the Senior Special Assistant to Governor Sanwo-Olu on New Media. He says here today, that's referring to Friday, the Lagos State government had a meeting with e-hailing ride stakeholders, which was chaired by Governor Sanwo-Olu at the Lagos House Marina. Then he now talked about resolutions that were made. If you look at his next tweet, he made one clarification, because this was on our updates that we got, saying that ride-hailing cars had to be at least no older than 3 years. He says here the idea that e-hailing companies using a car of 3 years and below is fake news. It is for what we call corporate cabs. They didn't really expand on what that meant by corporate cabs. Apparently, corporate cabs are what is supposed to be no older than 3 years. So this has nothing to do with the e-hailing business. So if you look at the updates, he sent out a series of tweets. If we take a look at some of the updates from what we talked about, he said there must be comprehensive insurance cover, which will cover drivers and passengers. A reduction of 20% on the operational licensing fee. So, for example, the 10 million, you're taking off 20%, you only end up paying 8 million there. That's what the fees, licensing fees we talked about on the renewal. A flat fee, number 3, of 20 naira to be known as a road improvement fund, which will be levied on each ride or trip. So 20 naira per fee. It makes you wonder about what we already pay for those road improvements already. But anyway, number 4, a 90-day compliance with documentation for the drivers. There will be a one-stop shop for all documentation. And then he says ride-hailing companies have to work with various bodies in the business for a good relationship. Also, a second update, we have another update on next slide, where he says there must be due diligence and background check on all drivers. Riders should desist from offline trips and transactions. And then this number 8, e-hailing firms must make necessary data available to government. So between that and the 20% reduction, those two might be the sticking points, because I'm not sure if they're going to want to give all their data to the government, but maybe it's for tax purposes or insecurity, as they talked about previously. And then finally, we go to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Over the weekend, their benchmark interest rate was hiked by up to 18.5% from 7.5. The rate was lowered from 9% to 7.5 in March, but they did this in order to counter inflation. Year-on-year inflation in the Democratic Republic of Congo has jumped to 14%. It was up by 10 percentage points from 2019, where it was at 4%. GDP is expected to contract by 2.4%. It grew by 4% in 2019. But essentially, they are doing this to combat inflation, and that's in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And that's our African business update. Well,
Rotus, let's talk a little bit more about the unemployment and unemployment figures in Nigeria. When you combine it, it's about 55.7%. Yes. Now, what we face in Nigeria, I guess, is stagflation right now. Rise in inflation, rise in unemployment, fall in productivity. And the government, since March, have been taking a number of steps. So what are we dealing with here? The failure of the efforts, the fiscal measures. If so, what other measures should we adopt? And then you will recall that in the course of the year, the Senate, in particular, had to call for a state of emergency on unemployment in Nigeria. Now, do you support that move, that we have reached a point where the government should call a state of emergency on unemployment in Nigeria? I mean, some states are posting 45% unemployment rates. That looks like really very serious situation going forward. What do you recommend?
It does, Doctor. So to your first question, what has been done so far? Just to put that into context, we talked to an analyst in South Africa when we were talking about South African unemployment, Chris Hart. He said that this was regards to job training programs that the South African government had put in place to try to improve unemployment. He said, quote, that you can train people until they are 40 or 50 years old. Train them all you want. If you don't place them in actual jobs, it doesn't make a difference. So that's the same thing we're seeing here. Empower, all these other programs. You can train them, but all these people that are being trained must be placed somewhere. And to your second question, yes, I do agree with the Senate that a state of emergency has to be called for unemployment here, because it is debilitating to wake up every morning and not have any purpose and anywhere to go. And as Dr. Ngige talked about, Minister for Labor and Employment, there's repercussions in security, kidnapping, and everything else. So, yes, I agree. There is a state of emergency that needs to be declared.
I mean, Rotus, like Professor Kichariwa would say, you cannot be more correct, because we're already seeing the indications. All right? Thank you so much, Rotus.
Thank you.
Moving on to business update. Barker Wilson joins us now for more from London.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
I'll take you to China first in the Asia roundup, and their shares actually jumped today, led by securities firms on hope that the capital market reforms which the government's introducing would boost revenues. But, and here's the big contrast, Japanese down, fell by the most in 2 weeks, the country posting its worst economic figures since records began in 1980. That's down to the coronavirus pandemic, crimping consumer spending. Consumer spending is 50% of the economy in Japan, so you can understand why it was hit so hard by that. But investors actually took that data in their stride. It wasn't unexpected. And there is a feeling that Q3 and Q4 will see an improvement in their economies. So therefore, US stock futures today, in other words, those you're seeing the New York Stock Exchange, indicate Wall Street will make moderate gains as retail earnings results queue up. I'll give you those at the end of my report. But nervousness, really, that was the thing from last week. There appears to be an increasing nervousness that for all the optimism about where the stock markets have been going, that economies really are reaching the limits of what they can actually do without increasing a wave of second spike, a pandemic in the autumn months, and also those rising tensions between the US and China. Remember, those US-China trade talks were cancelled this weekend, and by that executive order that President Trump brought, forcing China's ByteDance to sell off its US operation, not helping things. The World Bank chief economist, here he is, Carmen Reinhart, warned at the weekend that the prospect of a V-shaped recovery was a V-shaped recovery actually driven by China. Not really a high probability, and even though there have been rebounds, they're not very. He and his committee are not very hopeful about that. And the rising infection rate in Europe is actually showing that these knee-jerk responses could just destroy what's been achieved already. There were very brittle ground here. And also we're seeing pressure being brought to extend the furlough programme in Europe. And we've got Olaf Scholz, who is German finance minister, talking about that on German TV yesterday, suggesting the government was ready to inject another 10 billion euro to extend the job security programme. And that, of course, will increase pressure on other finance ministers to do the same thing, not least of which our very own Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak. So US politics is obviously providing a problem for US economies, given that no solution, no meeting together with the stimulus plan there, and that is not going to happen as we understand it for some time. Commodities, I'll do the oil price for you first. WTI flirting with about $43 a barrel. Short-term support lies at 44. A bad week for gold, sliding back from recent record highs, as we've discovered, and that's driven by a partial increase in bond yields, which appear to be driven by a sharp rise in inflation. So very briefly then, a busy week ahead. Let's start with the FOMC. We get their minutes on Wednesday. Most of the action there has actually taken place outside what the FOMC has actually decided in their committee. Remember the Fed chair, Jay Powell, implying that about time the politicians got their house in order, quite honestly, and not very unveiled threat or aside perhaps to Capitol Hill, saying, why don't you decide on this stimulus plan, and as well as and then we can maybe talk about lifting some lockdown measures as well. UK public spending on Thursday. Again, I think the figures there will show that we're still spending a lot of money, but it will either increase or decrease the Chancellor's take on maybe, or the Finance Minister's take, Rishi Sunak's take on maybe extending the furlough scheme. Retail sales we're going to get here, and the rebounds of 12% in May, 13.9% in June. Apparently people are shopping. US weekly jobless claims, obviously, we get on Thursday, and Rotis and I will be talking about those. And finally, second quarter earnings season in the United States. I named these stores really because these will give us a big idea of consumer spending in the United States. We've got Walmart, we've got Home Depot, we've got low-vis companies and Target and Kohl's as well. These are all big retail companies in the United States. So we will have, by the end of the week, a fairly clearer picture of what the consumer was thinking last month.
All right.
Well, Michael, I was going to ask you about the recovery and the pessimism of the World Bank. You have consistently on this program said we should expect a V-shaped recovery, even particularly with regards to the UK economy. Now we have the chief economist of the World Bank saying that we shouldn't be so optimistic. Now, are you on the basis of this new position likely to review your position? And what should we expect? Well, a U-shaped recovery or a W-shaped recovery? And how do we differentiate this in terms of growth I came out of thinking about the V-shaped recovery about 2 months ago. What I said at that stage was it might be more a swoosh, you know, like that kind of a big drop and then a gradual increase. I think certainly recovery is plateauing at the moment. Remember that I would just say, though, that the World Bank does tend to look with a rear view mirror at what's going on. They tend, although they say they look forward, what they're actually doing is they are pushing backwards. And if you actually take note of what the stock markets are doing right now, whether you believe there's any connection between them and the real economy, at least the stock markets have to look forward. And I think for all that, I'm relatively optimistic. No, I don't think there's going to be a V-shaped recovery, but I think there will be a recovery. My ongoing concern about this is what sort of economy we're going to recover into, what kind of jobs will be available. And I happen to think also that business is pretty agile. I know it is in Nigeria. I know it is generally in Africa. You have a huge entrepreneurial streak in your continent. And I think the same thing happens in the UK as well. Europe, not so sure about because it's bounded by all the different countries and it has to really react to the lowest common denominator there. But I think we could actually do something.
All right, Michael, I just quickly want to talk about the UK economy. Obviously, it's in a recession now. But the numbers that came out of the eating program by the government in the UK said about 10.9 million people got on that program. They went out there, they spent money, they got a rebate about £10 on what they spent. I mean, how is that going to create a sort of like nimbleness that the economy needs to come out of this recession?
All that was, I think, designed to do was to say to people, all right, why don't you come out of hibernation and have this on us, as it were. So it engendered a certain amount of hope, I think, within the population that they could actually go out and, as it were, eat out on the government for those few days. I have to say, though, that's shrunk. And again, I'm not a political commentator, but you will have heard of the educational crisis in this country and the further education results into university, the shambles of that system. And I think that actually that's a far more devastating will have a far more devastating impact on the future of youth in this country than anything to do with the pandemic virus. But that's what the eating out scheme was. It was a PR exercise.
Obviously, I mean, you said it right. I mean, the A-level results were worse than shambolic, to say the very least. Thank you so much for that, Michael. We'll go for update on COVID-19 pandemic. Aaron Akerjala here with us. Aaron, how are you doing this morning?
I'm very good. Rufai, good morning to you. Lovely weekend, I must actually say.
Oh, yeah, lovely weekend. Lovely one.
Good morning, Doctor.
What are you celebrating? I'm sure you have the Champions League and the Europa League on your mind.
Adisa, good morning to you.
Good morning, Aaron.
Yes, let's get started with COVID-19 and the numbers we're actually seeing and what actually happened and transpired over the course of the weekend. And let's start it off from looking at the overall figures from the world right now. It's kind of grim, understanding that we have actually got into 21,674,000, and while the global debt still stands as well over 700,000, at the moment 775,275. Now, to be very precise, the US actually have passed the great milestone, while there are still debates about what is becoming of the US Postal Service. The debts are still pushing hard. Now they've crossed the 170,000 mark. As a matter of fact, 170,052 is the actual number as of this moment in the number of fatalities we've seen from COVID-19 in the US, which is still very fearful, understanding that 5.4 million people have gone down with COVID-19. But the US have been going through hoops to try to increase testing. And as a matter of fact, people are even saying that testing, it might just be a farce by itself. But let's look at places that are being ravaged as we get into the graph in the US by COVID-19. You can actually see the Georgia region, Nevada, Tennessee, North Dakota are seeing major rises not in infections, but in deaths. Moving on, next one, we can also see some key places like Puerto Rico, all right, then Indiana, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia are recording high number of deaths from COVID-19. And also another place we're seeing a massive rise in the number of deaths from COVID-19 is India, the Asian country of India. We know that it's home to well over 1.3 billion people in the world. And at the moment, they've crossed that green milestone. Over 50,000 people have been infected. As a matter of fact, 50,921. Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and Delhi are some of the key places where we're seeing major infections and also deaths. Now that it has spread into the hinterlands, there are fears that the government might not just be able to contain it. They're still trying to get a grip on COVID-19. But you and I know this. As soon as lockdowns are being lifted, we see these things spread like wildfire. And that is what is really happening in places like India. We've seen it happen in Africa. We've been talking about it. Since we're talking about Africa, let's look at the African figures at the moment. And looking at it from the African CDC, right now we are well over 1 million cases, 1.1 as a matter of fact, right now with 25,000 deaths. Now, trying to break it down, let's try to dimension some of these things for you to help us, because we know that South Africa still has the highest number of cases in Africa and the 5th highest in the world, followed by Egypt, then Nigeria, then Ghana, Morocco, Algeria. Although there are still questions being raised about the testing capacity of Africa. But I must say, South Africa, Egypt, and Morocco take the cake for the number of tests they've actually done on this continent, which is miles ahead of the rest of the 54-nation bloc. Now, going further, there's even been a breakdown. You can actually see that particular graph that the continent actually has reporting 100,000 cases weekly at the moment. It took 100 days to record the first 100,000, and right now, on a weekly basis, that number is coming up. We spoke about the fact that a lot has been done, and the proactive steps that were taken by leaders, all that is being thrown out of the window right now, because with the fact that we're now getting 100,000 cases every other week actually just shows what is happening. Right now, we stand at 1.1 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the country. 2%, we are seeing a 2%, major 2% rise, even though the continent it makes up about 70% of the world's population. We are seeing a major rise in COVID-19 at the moment, not just in infections, but deaths. But quickly, for the brevity of time, South Africa will be lifting a ban today, and these are some of the things that they've actually said they will happen. Of course, they've spoke about gatherings are still limited, curfews for churches, and also there's still prohibition on international travel. Moving on to the next one, but sale on alcohol will be lifted, and travel between provinces are now allowed, and although mask wearing is still mandatory for South Africa. And something good is actually happened over the course of the weekend, and that is the fact that the Prime Minister of the UAE and also the man who is in charge of Dubai, talking about Prince Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, actually not just invested, also he had, maybe, I don't know if it's a birthday gift because he just turned 71. He actually sent humanitarian needs to Sudan and Nigeria, 14 tons of medical supplies and 20 tons of food to Sudan and Nigeria. And people have been asking questions. Nigeria has been receiving international aid time and time again, and it is not reflective in their fight against COVID-19.
Well, I think first we should thank the United Arab Emirates and other countries like Germany, like France, like the United States, that have provided support for the COVID-19 initiative in Nigeria. But we must also go beyond that and ask questions about how the Nigerian authorities have been accounting for or should account for this aid that we're getting from different parts of the world and from international agencies. That's one leg of it. But Nigeria also bears a special burden. And that's why we've been saying that it's important that Nigeria also takes the position of leadership in this fight. Because, look, the entire West African region, at the risk of sounding patronizing, is the responsibility of Nigeria. And Nigeria, at some point, if there should be an escalation within the West African region, we also have to bear responsibility, not just for our geographical environment, but for also the neighboring countries. But the only consolation we have is the report by the institute that is led by Dr. Anthony Fauci, which says that there are regional variations in a report published in the Science Journal in terms of how people respond to COVID-19. And maybe perhaps in Africa, we have a relatively lower prevalence rate because of that regional variation that particular study, which was released about a few days ago, I think early last week, indicated. But Nigeria also has a responsibility to provide leadership. We should not depend on aid. We have to be far more proactive.
Yeah. I mean, a great question I'd like to ask is, what are we doing to get on the vaccine race? I'm not just talking about, what COVAX is doing with Gavi to ensure that there's a pool for vaccine for Africa. I'm saying, going ahead to say when this comes out, when the patent of the vaccine comes out, let's look at the possibility of producing some of those vaccines here in Nigeria. Nigeria used to take the lead in terms of vaccine production. In the 70s, we had yellow fever vaccine here that was shipped to other parts of Africa to be used. But all of a sudden, and that was in Yaba, all of a sudden we don't see that any longer. That's not working. I think part of the things the monies too should be used to is how about revamping those labs that which we produce vaccines back in the day? Why can't we revamp those labs? Why can't we get on the vaccine race? States are coming out saying we want to get on the race. India is saying I want to get on the race. They've got labs to do that. Okay. But the problem here is that we do not have labs.
As a matter of fact, South Africa and Egypt are also creating labs that can help duplicate some of those
And I'm also very scared about this abdominal rise in COVID-19 cases. In 7 days, we've got over 100,000 cases.
But for me, I think it's very unsettling to hear Sudan and Nigeria in the same sentence receiving aid, I must tell you.
It's unfortunate.
But, you know, Aaron, you watch these numbers every day, and scientists all over the world have told us that simple measures as non-pharmaceutical interventions, such as wearing a face mask, washing our hands, can help curb these numbers.
Yes, it does.
Why do you think that we keep seeing these numbers?
It's because people are not just wearing face masks. People have taken these things for granted time and time again. People claim there is a new normal, but in all sincerity, there's no new normal. People are returning back to the old normal, just going about their daily activities, no social distancing, not wearing a face mask. Nobody even cares about hand sanitizers anymore.
Maybe people are not embracing the new normal in Nigeria, but in other parts of the world, people
because we're even seeing things, we're even seeing protestations even happen in different parts of the world, and they're claiming and still insisting that face masks, because severally for countries that have been disillusioned about the way the government have fought COVID-19.
But the caveat here on is that we should follow this science.
Yeah. Yes.
And we're seeing a lot of hope in the scientific.
Okay, you are very hopeful. I like that, Doctor.
Yes, I mean, you know that the Yale School of Health just said there is a saliva test that produces results in 3 hours. That's part of the efforts that give us hope.